This is a continuation of The Gods of Mars by Edgar Burroughs, comprising chapters 5 through 7. Chapter 5. Corridors of Peril. How long I slept upon the floor of the storeroom I do not know, but it must have been many hours. I was awakened with a start by cries of alarm, and scarce were my eyes opened, nor had I yet sufficiently collected my wits to quite realize where I was, when a fusillade of shots rang out, reverberating through the subterranean corridors in a series of deafening echoes. In an instant I was upon my feet. A dozen lesser Therns confronted us from a large doorway at the opposite end of the storeroom from which we had entered. About me lay the bodies of my companions, with the exception of Thuvia and Tars Tarkas, who, like myself, had been asleep upon the floor and thus escaped the first raking fire. As I gained my feet, the Therns lowered their wicked rifles, their faces distorted in mingled chagrin, consternation, and alarm. Instantly I rose to the occasion. "What means this?" I cried in tones of fierce anger. "Is Satyr Throg to be murdered by his own vassals?" "Have mercy, O master of the 10th cycle," cried one of the fellows, while the others edged toward the doorway as though to attempt a surreptitious escape from the presence of the Mighty One. "Ask them their mission here," whispered Thuvia at my elbow. "What do you hear, fellows?" I cried. "Two from the outer world are at large within the dominions of the Therns. We sought them at the command of the father of Therns. One was white with black hair, the other a huge green warrior," and here the fellow cast a suspicious glance toward Tars Tarkas. "Here, then, is one of them," spoke Thuvia, indicating the Thark, "and if you will look upon this dead man by the door, perhaps you will recognize the other. It was left for Satyr Throg and his poor slaves to accomplish what the lesser Therns of the guard were unable to do. We have killed one and captured the other. For this had Satyr Throg given us our liberty. And now in your stupidity have you come and killed all but myself, and like to have killed the mighty Satyr Throg himself." The men looked very sheepish and very scared. "Had they not better throw these bodies to the plant men and then return to their quarters, O Mighty One?" asked Thuvia of me. "Yes, do as Thuvia bids you," I said. As the men picked up the bodies, I noticed that the one who stooped to gather up the late Satyr Throg started as his closer scrutiny fell upon the upturned face, and then the fellow stole a furtive, sneaking glance in my direction from the corner of his eye. That he suspicioned something of the truth I could have sworn, but that it was only a suspicion which he did not dare voice was evidenced by his silence. Again, as he bore the body from the room, he shot a quick but searching glance toward me, and then his eyes fell once more upon the bald and shiny dome of the dead man in his arms. The last fleeting glimpse that I obtained of his profile, as he passed from my sight without the chamber, revealed a cunning smile of triumph upon his lips. Only Tars Tarkas, Thuvia, and I were left. The fatal marksmanship of the Therns had snatched from our companions whatever slender chance they had of gaining the perilous freedom of the world without. So soon as the last of the gruesome procession had disappeared, the girl urged us to take up our flight once more. She, too, had noted the questioning attitude of the Thern who had borne Satyr Throg away. "It bodes no good for us, O Prince," she said. "For even though this fellow dared not chance accusing you in error, there be those above with power sufficient to demand a closer scrutiny, and that, Prince, would indeed prove fatal." I shrugged my shoulders. It seemed that in any event the outcome of our plight must end in death. I was refreshed from my sleep, but still weak from loss of blood. My wounds were painful. No medicinal aid seemed possible. How I longed for the almost miraculous healing power of the strange salves and lotions of the green Martian women. In an hour they would have had me as new. I was discouraged. Never had a feeling of such utter hopelessness come over me in the face of danger. Then the long flowing yellow locks of the holy Thern, caught by some vagrant draught, blew about my face. Might they not still open the way of freedom? If we acted in time, might we not even yet escape before the general alarm was sounded? We could at least try. "What will the fellow do first, Thuvia?" I asked. "How long will it be before they may return for us?" "He will go directly to the father of Therns, old Matai Shang. He may have to wait for an audience, but since he is very high among the lesser Therns, in fact is a Thorian among them, it will not be long that Matai Shang will keep him waiting. Then, if the father of Therns puts credence in his story, another hour will see the galleries and chambers, the courts and gardens filled with searchers. What we do then must be done within an hour. What is the best way, Thuvia, the shortest way out of this celestial Hades?" "Straight to the top of the cliffs, Prince," she replied, "and then through the gardens to the inner courts. From there our way will lie within the temples of the Therns and across them to the outer court. Then the ramparts, O Prince, it is hopeless. 10,000 warriors could not hew a way to liberty from out this awful place." Since the beginning of time, little by little, stone by stone, have the Therns been ever adding to the defenses of their stronghold. A continuous line of impregnable fortifications circles the outer slopes of the mountains of Ots. Within the temples that lie behind the ramparts, 1,000,000 fighting men are ever ready. The courts and gardens are filled with slaves, with women, and with children. None could go a stone's throw without detection. If there is no other way, Thuvia, why dwell upon the difficulties of this? We must face them. Can we not better make the attempt after dark? Asked Tars Tarkas. There would seem to be no chance by day. There would be a little better chance by night, but even then the ramparts are well guarded, possibly better than by day. There are fewer abroad in the courts and gardens, though, said Thuvia. What is the hour? I asked. It was midnight when you released me from my chains, said Thuvia. 2 hours later we reached the storeroom. There you slept for 14 hours. It must now be nearly sundown again. Come, we will go to some nearby window in the cliff and make sure. So saying, she led the way through winding corridors until at a sudden turn we came upon an opening which overlooked the valley door. At our right the sun was setting, a huge red orb below the western range of Ots. A little below us stood the holy Thern on watch upon his balcony. His scarlet robe of office was pulled tightly about him in anticipation of the cold that comes so suddenly with darkness as the sun sets. So rare is the atmosphere of Mars that it absorbs very little heat from the sun. During the daylight hours it is always extremely hot. At night it is intensely cold. Nor does the thin atmosphere refract the sun's rays or diffuse its light as upon Earth. There is no twilight on Mars. When the great orb of day disappears beneath the horizon, the effect is precisely as that of the extinguishing of a single lamp within a chamber. From brilliant light you are plunged without warning into utter darkness. Then the moons come, the mysterious magic moons of Mars, hurtling like monster meteors low across the face of the planet. The declining sun lighted brilliantly the eastern banks of Chorus, the crimson sward, the gorgeous forest. Beneath the trees we saw feeding many herds of plant men. The adults stood aloft upon their toes and their mighty tails, their talons pruning every available leaf and twig. It was then that I understood the careful trimming of the trees which had led me to form the mistaken idea when first I opened my eyes upon the grove, that it was the playground of a civilized people. As we watched, our eyes wandered to the rolling ice, which issued from the base of the cliffs beneath us. Presently there emerged from the mountain a canoe laden with lost souls from the outer world. There were a dozen of them. All were of the highly civilized and cultured race of red men who were dominant on Mars. The eyes of the herald upon the balcony beneath us fell upon the doomed party as soon as did ours. He raised his head and, leaning far out over the low rail that rimmed his dizzy perch, voiced the shrill, weird wail that called the demons of this hellish place to the attack. For an instant the brutes stood with stiffly erected ears. Then they poured from the grove toward the river's bank, covering the distance with great, ungainly leaps. The party had landed and was standing on the sward as the awful horde came in sight. There was a brief and futile effort of defense. Then silence as the huge, repulsive shapes covered the bodies of their victims and scores of sucking mouths fastened themselves to the flesh of their prey. I turned away in disgust. Their part is soon over, said Thuvia. The great white apes get the flesh when the plant men have drained the arteries. Look, they are coming now. As I turned my eyes in the direction the girl indicated, I saw a dozen of the great white monsters running across the valley toward the river bank. Then the sun went down and darkness that could almost be felt engulfed us. Thuvia lost no time in leading us toward the corridor which winds back and forth up through the cliffs toward the surface thousands of feet above the level on which we had been. Twice great bands, wandering loose through the galleries, blocked our progress, but in each instance Thuvia spoke a low word of command, and the snarling beasts slunk sullenly away. If you can dissolve all our obstacles as easily as you master these fierce brutes, I can see no difficulties in our way, I said to the girl, smiling. How do you do it? She laughed, and then shuddered. I do not quite know, she said. When first I came here I angered Satyr Throg because I repulsed him. He ordered me to be thrown into one of the great pits in the inner gardens. It was filled with bands. In my own country I had been accustomed to command. Something in my voice, I do not know what, cowed the beasts as they sprang to attack me. Instead of tearing me to pieces, as Satyr Throg had desired, they fawned at my feet. So greatly were Satyr Throg and his friends amused by the sight that they kept me to train and handle the terrible creatures. I know them all by name. There are many of them wandering through these lower regions. They are the scavengers. Many prisoners die here in their chains. The Bants solve the problem of sanitation, at least in this respect. In the gardens and temples above they are kept in pits. The Therns fear them. It is because of the Bants that they seldom venture below ground except as their duties call them. An idea occurred to me. suggested by what Thuvia had just said. Why not take a number of bants and set them loose before us above ground? I asked. Thuvia laughed. It would distract attention from us, I am sure, she said. She commenced calling in a low sing-song voice that was half purr. She continued this as we wound our tedious way through the maze of subterranean passages and chambers. Presently soft, padded feet sounded close behind us, and as I turned I saw a pair of great, green eyes shining in the dark shadows at our rear. From a diverging tunnel a sinuous, tawny form crept stealthily toward us. Low growls and angry snarls assailed our ears on every side as we hastened on, and one by one the ferocious creatures answered the call of their mistress. She spoke a word to each as it joined us. Like well-schooled terriers, they paced the corridors with us, but I could not help but note the lathering jowls, nor the hungry expressions with which they eyed Tarkus and myself. Soon we were entirely surrounded by some 50 of the brutes. 2 walked close on either side of Thuvia, as guards might walk. The sleek sides of others now and then touched my own naked limbs. It was a strange experience. The almost noiseless passage of naked human feet and padded paws, the golden walls splashed with precious stones, the dim light cast by the tiny radium bulbs set at considerable distances along the roof, the huge, maned beasts of prey crowding with low growls about us, the mighty green warrior towering high above us all, myself crowned with the priceless diadem of a holy thurn, and leading the procession the beautiful girl, Thuvia. I shall not soon forget it. Presently we approached a great chamber more brightly lighted than the corridors. Thuvia halted us. Quietly she stole toward the entrance and glanced within. Then she motioned us to follow her. The room was filled with specimens of the strange beings that inhabit this underworld, a heterogeneous collection of hybrids, the offspring of the prisoners from the outside world, red and green Martians and the white race of Therns. Constant confinement below ground had wrought odd freaks upon their skins. They more resemble corpses than living beings. Many are deformed, others maimed, while the majority, Thuvia explained, are sightless. As they lay sprawled about the floor, sometimes overlapping one another, again in heaps of several bodies, they suggested instantly to me the grotesque illustrations that I had seen in copies of Dante's Inferno. And what more fitting comparison? Was this not indeed a veritable hell, peopled by lost souls dead and damned beyond all hope? Picking our way carefully, we threaded a winding path across the chamber, the great band sniffing hungrily at the tempting prey spread before them in such tantalizing and defenseless profusion. Several times we passed the entrances to other chambers similarly peopled, and twice again we were compelled to cross directly through them. In others were chained prisoners and beasts. Why is it that we see no Therns? I asked of Thuvia. They seldom traverse the underworld at night, for then it is that the great bands prowl the dim corridors seeking their prey. The Therns fear the awful denizens of this cruel and hopeless world that they have fostered and allowed to grow beneath their feet. The prisoners even sometimes turn upon them and rend them. The Thern can never tell from what dark shadow an assassin may spring upon his back. By day it is different. Then the corridors and chambers are filled with guards passing to and fro. Slaves from the temples above come by hundreds to the granaries and storerooms. All is life then. You did not see it because I led you not in the beaten tracks but through roundabout passages seldom used. Yet it is possible that we may meet a Thern even yet. They do occasionally find it necessary to come here after the sun has set. Because of this I have moved with such great caution. But we reached the upper galleries without detection, and presently Thuvia halted us at the foot of a short, steep ascent. Above us, she said, is a doorway which opens onto the inner gardens. I have brought you thus far. From here on for 4 miles to the outer ramparts our way will be beset by countless dangers. Guards patrol the courts, the temples, the gardens. Every inch of the ramparts themselves is beneath the eye of a sentry. I could not understand the necessity for such an enormous force of armed men about a spot so surrounded by mystery and superstition that not a soul upon Barsoom would have dared to approach it even had they known its exact location. I questioned Thuvia, asking her what enemies the Therns could fear in their impregnable fortress. We had reached the doorway now and Thuvia was opening it. They fear the black pirates of Barsoom, O Prince, she said, from whom may our first ancestors preserve us. The door swung open, the smell of growing things greeted my nostrils, the cool night air blew against my cheek. The great bands sniffed the unfamiliar odors, and then with a rush they broke past us with low growls, swarming across the gardens beneath the lurid light of the light. Suddenly a great cry arose from the roofs of the temples, a cry of alarm and warning that, taken up from point to point, ran off to the east and to the west, from temple court and rampart, until it sounded as a dim echo in the distance. The great Thark's long sword leaped from its scabbard. Tuvia shrank, shuddering to my side. Chapter 6. The Black Pirates of Barsoom. What is it? I asked of the girl. For answer she pointed to the sky. I looked, and there, above us, I saw shadowy bodies flitting hither and thither high over temple court and garden. Almost immediately flashes of light broke from these strange objects. There was a roar of musketry, and then answering flashes and roars from temple and rampart. The Black Pirates of Barsoom, O Prince, said Tuvia. In great circles the aircraft of the marauders swept lower and lower toward the defending forces of the Therns. Volley after volley they vomited upon the temple guards. Volley on volley crashed through the thin air toward the fleeting and elusive flyers. As the pirates swooped closer toward the ground, Thern soldiery poured from the temples into the gardens and courts. The sight of them in the open brought a score of flyers darting toward us from all directions. The Therns fired upon them through shields affixed to their rifles, but on, steadily on, came the grim, black craft. They were small flyers for the most part, built for 2 to 3 men. A few larger ones there were, but these kept high aloft, dropping bombs upon the temples from their keel batteries. At length, with a concerted rush, evidently in response to a signal of command, the pirates in our immediate vicinity dashed recklessly to the ground in the very midst of the Thern soldiery. Scarcely waiting for their craft to touch, the creatures manning them leaped among the Therns with the fury of demons. Such fighting. Never had I witnessed its like before. I had thought the Green Martians the most ferocious warriors in the universe, but the awful abandon with which the black pirates threw themselves upon their foes transcended everything I ever before had seen. Beneath the brilliant light of Mars' 2 glorious moons, the whole scene presented itself in vivid distinctness. The golden-haired, white-skinned Therns battling with desperate courage in hand-to-hand conflict with their ebony-skinned foemen. Here a little knot of struggling warriors trampled a bed of gorgeous pomalia. There the curved sword of a black man found the heart of a Thern and left its dead foeman at the foot of a wondrous statue carved from a living ruby. Yonder a dozen Therns pressed a single pirate back upon a bench of emerald, upon whose iridescent surface a strangely beautiful Barsoomian design was traced out in inlaid diamonds. A little to one side stood Tuvia, the Thark, and I. The tide of battle had not reached us, but the fighters from time to time swung close, enough that we might distinctly note them. The black pirates interested me immensely. I had heard vague rumors, little more than legends they were, during my former life on Mars, but never had I seen them, nor talked with one who had. They were popularly supposed to inhabit the lesser moon, from which they descended upon Barsoom at long intervals. Where they visited they wrought the most horrible atrocities, and when they left carried away with them firearms and ammunition, and young girls as prisoners. These latter, the rumor had it, they sacrificed to some terrible god in an orgy which ended in the eating of their victims. I had an excellent opportunity to examine them, as the strife occasionally brought now one and now another close to where I stood. They were large men, possibly 6 feet and over in height. Their features were clear-cut and handsome in the extreme. Their eyes were well set and large, though a slight narrowness lent them a crafty appearance. The iris, as well as I could determine by moonlight, was of extreme blackness, while the eyeball itself was quite white and clear. The physical structure of their bodies seemed identical with those of the Terrans, the Red Men, and of my own. Only in the color of their skin did they differ materially from us, that is, of the appearance of polished ebony, and odd as it may seem for a southerner to say it, adds to rather than detracts from their marvelous beauty. But if their bodies are divine, their hearts apparently are quite the reverse. Never did I witness such a malign lust for blood as these demons of the outer air evinced in their mad battle with the Therns. All about us in the garden lay their sinister craft, which the Therns, for some reason, then unaccountable to me, made no effort to injure. Now and again a black warrior would rush from a nearby temple bearing a young woman in his arms. Straight for his flyer he would leap, while those of his comrades who fought nearby would rush to cover his escape. The Therns on their side would hasten to rescue the girl, and in an instant the two would be swallowed in the vortex of a maelstrom of yelling devils, hacking and hewing at one another, like fiends incarnate. But always it seemed were the black pirates of Barsoom victorious, and the girl brought miraculously unharmed through the conflict, borne away into the outer darkness upon the deck of a swift flyer. Fighting similar to that which surrounded us could be heard in both directions, as far as sound carried, and Tuvia told me that the attacks of the black pirates were usually made simultaneously along the entire ribbon-like domain of the Therns, which circles the valley door on the outer slopes of the mountains of Otz. As the fighting receded from our position for a moment, Tuvia turned toward me with a question. "Do you understand now, O Prince?" she said. Why a million warriors guard the domains of the Holy Therns by day and by night. The scene you are witnessing now is but a repetition of what I have seen enacted a score of times during the 15 years I have been a prisoner here. From time immemorial, the black pirates of Barsoom have preyed upon the Holy Therns. Yet they never carry their expeditions to a point, as one might readily believe it was in their power to do, where the extermination of the race of Therns is threatened. It is as though they but utilize the race as playthings with which they satisfy their ferocious lust for fighting, and from whom they collect toll in arms and ammunition and in prisoners. Why don't they jump in and destroy these flyers? I asked. That would soon put a stop to the attacks, or at least the blacks would scarce be so bold. Why, see how perfectly unguarded they leave their craft, as though they were lying safe in their own hangars at home. The Therns do not dare. They tried it once, ages ago, but the next night, and for a whole moon thereafter, 1,000 great black battleships circled the mountains of Oats, pouring tons of projectiles upon the temples, the gardens, and the courts, until every Thern who was not killed was driven for safety into the subterranean galleries. The Therns know that they live at all only by the sufferance of the black men. They were near to extermination that once, and they will not venture risking it again. As she ceased talking, a new element was instilled into the conflict. It came from a source equally unlooked for by either Thern or pirate. The great bands which we had liberated in the garden had evidently been awed at first by the sound of the battle, the yelling of the warriors, and the loud report of rifle and bomb. But now they must have become angered by the continuous noise and excited by the smell of new blood, for all of a sudden a great form shot from a clump of low shrubbery into the midst of a struggling mass of humanity. A horrid scream of bestial rage broke from the Banth as he felt warm flesh beneath his powerful talons. As though his cry was but a signal to the others, the entire great pack hurled themselves among the fighters. Panic reigned in an instant. Thern and black man turned alike against the common enemy, for the Banths showed no partiality toward either. The awful beasts bore down 100 men by the mere weight of their great bodies as they hurled themselves into the thick of the fight. Leaping and clawing, they mowed down the warriors with their powerful paws, turning for an instant to rend their victims with frightful fangs. The scene was fascinating in its terribleness, but suddenly it came to me that we were wasting valuable time watching this conflict, which in itself might prove a means of our escape. The Therns were so engaged with their terrible assailants that now, if ever, escape should be comparatively easy. I turned to search for an opening through the contending hordes. If we could but reach the ramparts, we might find that the pirates somewhere had thinned the guarding forces and left a way open to us to the world without. As my eyes wandered about the garden, the sight of the hundreds of aircraft lying unguarded around us suggested the simplest avenue to freedom. Why it had not occurred to me before. I was thoroughly familiar with the mechanism of every known make of flyer on Barsoom. For 9 years I had sailed and fought with the Navy of Helium. I had raced through space on the tiny one-man air scout, and I had commanded the greatest battleship that ever had floated in the thin air of dying Mars. To think with me is to act. Grasping Thuvia by the arm, I whispered to Tars Tarkas to follow me. Quickly we glided toward a small flyer which lay furthest from the battling warriors. Another instant found us huddled on the tiny deck. My hand was on the starting lever. I pressed my thumb upon the button which controls the ray of repulsion, that splendid discovery of the Martians which permits them to navigate the thin atmosphere of their planet in huge ships that dwarf the dreadnoughts of our earthly navies into pitiful insignificance. The craft swayed slightly, but she did not move. Then a new cry of warning broke upon our ears. Turning, I saw a dozen black pirates dashing toward us from the melee. We had been discovered. With shrieks of rage, the demons sprang for us. With frenzied insistence, I continued to press the little button which should have sent us racing out into space, but still the vessel refused to budge. Then it came to me the reason that she would not rise. We had stumbled upon a two-man flyer. Its ray tanks were charged only with sufficient repulsive energy to lift 2 ordinary men. The Thark's great weight was anchoring us to our doom. The blacks were nearly upon us. There was not an instant to be lost in hesitation or doubt. I pressed the button far in and locked it. Then I set the lever at high speed, and as the blacks came yelling upon us, I slipped from the craft's deck and with drawn long sword met the attack. At the same moment a girl's shriek rang out behind me, and an instant later, as the blacks fell upon me, I heard far above my head and faintly in Tuvia's voice, "My prince, oh my prince, I would rather remain and die with," but the rest was lost in the noise of my assailants. I knew, though, that my ruse had worked, and that temporarily at least Tuvia and Tars Tarkas were safe, and the means of escape was theirs. For a moment it seemed that I could not withstand the weight of numbers that confronted me, but again, as on so many other occasions when I had been called upon to face fearful odds upon this planet of warriors and fierce beasts, I found that my earthly strength so far transcended that of my opponents that the odds were not so greatly against me as they appeared. My seething blade wove a net of death about me. For an instant the blacks pressed close to reach me with their shorter swords, but presently they gave back, and the esteem in which they suddenly had learned to hold my sword arm was writ large upon each countenance. I knew, though, that it was but a question of minutes before their greater numbers would wear me down, or get around my guard. I must go down eventually to certain death before them. I shuddered at the thought of it, dying thus in this terrible place where no word of my end ever could reach my Dija Thoris, dying at the hands of nameless black men in the gardens of the cruel Therns. Then my old-time spirit reasserted itself. The fighting blood of my Virginian sires coursed hot through my veins. The fierce blood-lust and the joy of battle surged over me. The fighting smile that has brought consternation to 1,000 foemen touched my lips. I put the thought of death out of my mind, and fell upon my antagonists with fury that those who escaped will remember to their dying day. That others would press to the support of those who faced me I knew, so even as I fought I kept my wits at work, searching for an avenue of escape. It came from an unexpected quarter out of the black night behind me. I had just disarmed a huge fellow who had given me a desperate struggle, and for a moment the blacks stood back for a breathing spell. They eyed me with malignant fury, yet withal there was a touch of respect in their demeanor. "Thurn," said one, "you fight like a dater. But for your detestable yellow hair and your white skin you would be an honor to the firstborn of Barsoom." "I am no Thurn," I said, and was about to explain that I was from another world, thinking that by patching a truce with these fellows and fighting with them against the Therns I might enlist their aid in regaining my liberty. But just at that moment a heavy object smote me a resounding whack between my shoulders that nearly felled me to the ground. As I turned to meet this new enemy, an object passed over my shoulder, striking one of my assailants squarely in the face and knocking him senseless to the sward. At the same instant, I saw that the thing that had struck us was the trailing anchor of a rather fair-sized air vessel, possibly a 10-man cruiser. The ship was floating slowly above us, not more than 50 feet over our heads. Instantly the one chance for escape that it offered presented itself to me. The vessel was slowly rising, and now the anchor was beyond the blacks who faced me and several feet above their heads. With a bound that left them gaping in wide-eyed astonishment, I sprang completely over them. A second leap carried me just high enough to grasp the now rapidly receding anchor. But I was successful, and there I hung by one hand, dragging through the branches of the higher vegetation of the gardens, while my late foeman shrieked and howled beneath me. Presently the vessel veered toward the west and then swung gracefully to the south. In another instant I was carried beyond the crest of the golden cliffs, out over the valley door, where, 6,000 feet below me, the lost sea of Chorus lay shimmering in the moonlight. Carefully I climbed to a sitting posture across the anchor's arms. I wondered if by chance the vessel might be deserted. I hoped so. Or possibly it might belong to a friendly people, and have wandered by accident, almost within the clutches of the pirates and the Therns. The fact that it was retreating from the scene of battle lent color to this hypothesis. But I decided to note positively and at once, so, with the greatest caution, I commenced to climb slowly up the anchor chain toward the deck above me. One hand had just reached for the vessel's rail and found it when a fierce black face was thrust over the side and eyes filled with triumphant hate looked into mine. Chapter 7. A fair goddess. For an instant the black pirate and I remained motionless, glaring into each other's eyes. Then, a grim smile curled the handsome lips above me, as an ebony hand came slowly in sight from above the edge of the deck, and the cold, hollow eye of a revolver sought the center of my forehead. Simultaneously my free hand shot out for the black throat, just within reach, and the ebony finger tightened on the trigger. The pirate's hissing cursed Thurn was half choked in his windpipe by my clutching fingers. The hammer fell with a futile click upon an empty chamber. Before he could fire again, I had pulled him so far over the edge of the deck that he was forced to drop his firearm and clutch the rail with both hands. My grasp upon his throat effectually prevented any outcry, and so we struggled in grim silence, he to tear away from my hold, I to drag him over to his death. His face was taking on a livid hue, his eyes were bulging from their sockets. It was evident to him that he soon must die unless he tore loose from the steel fingers that were choking the life from him. With a final effort he threw himself further back upon the deck, at the same instant releasing his hold upon the rail to tear frantically with both hands at my fingers in an effort to drag them from his throat. That little second was all that I awaited. With one mighty downward surge, I swept him clear of the deck. His falling body came near to tearing me from the frail hold that my single free hand had upon the anchor chain and plunging me with him to the waters of the sea below. I did not relinquish my grasp upon him, however, for I knew that a single shriek from those lips as he hurtled to his death in the silent waters of the sea would bring his comrades from above to avenge him. Instead, I held grimly to him, choking, ever choking, while his frantic struggles dragged me lower and lower toward the end of the chain. Gradually, his contortions became spasmodic, lessening by degrees until they ceased entirely. Then I released my hold upon him, and in an instant he was swallowed by the black shadows far below. Again I climbed to the ship's rail. This time I succeeded in raising my eyes to the level of the deck, where I could take a careful survey of the conditions immediately confronting me. The nearer moon had passed below the horizon, but the clear effulgence of the further satellite bathed the deck of the cruiser, bringing into sharp relief the bodies of 6 or 8 black men sprawled about in sleep. Huddled close to the base of a rapid-fire gun was a young white girl securely bound. Her eyes were widespread in an expression of horrified anticipation and fixed directly upon me as I came in sight above the edge of the deck. Unutterable relief instantly filled them as if they fell upon the mystic jewel which sparkled in the center of my stolen headpiece. She did not speak. Instead, her eyes warned me to beware the sleeping figures that surrounded her. Noiselessly, I gained the deck. The girl nodded to me to approach her. As I bent low, she whispered to me to release her. "I can aid you," she said, "and you will need all the aid available when they awaken." "Some of them will awake in chorus," I replied, smiling. She caught the meaning of my words, and the cruelty of her answering smile horrified me. One is not astonished by cruelty in a hideous face, but when it touches the features of a goddess whose fine chiseled lineaments might more fittingly portray love and beauty, the contrast is appalling. Quickly I released her. "Give me a revolver," she whispered. "I can use that upon those your sword does not silence in time." I did as she bid. Then I turned toward the distasteful work that lay before me. This was no time for fine compunctions, nor for a chivalry that these cruel demons would neither appreciate nor reciprocate. Stealthily I approached the nearest sleeper. When he awoke, he was well on his journey to the bosom of Chorus. His piercing shriek as consciousness returned to him came faintly up to us from the black depths beneath. The second awoke as I touched him, and though I succeeded in hurling him from the cruiser's deck, his wild cry of alarm brought the remaining pirates to their feet. There were 5 of them. As they arose, the girl's revolver spoke in sharp staccato, and one sank back to the deck again to rise no more. The others rushed madly upon me with drawn swords. The girl evidently dared not fire for fear of wounding me, but I saw her sneak stealthily and cat-like toward the flank of the attackers. Then they were on me. For a few minutes I experienced some of the hottest fighting I had ever passed through. The quarters were too small for footwork. It was stand your ground and give and take. At first I took considerably more than I gave, but presently I got beneath one fellow's guard and had the satisfaction of seeing him collapse upon the deck. The others redoubled their efforts. The crashing of their blades upon mine raised a terrific din that might have been heard for miles through the silent night. Sparks flew as steel smote steel. And then there was the dull and sickening sound of a shoulder bone parting beneath the keen edge of my Martian sword. 3 now faced me, but the girl was working her way to a point that would soon permit her to reduce the number, by 1 at least. Then things happened with such amazing rapidity that I can scarce comprehend even now all that took place in that brief instant. The 3 rushed me with the evident purpose of forcing me back the few steps that would carry my body over the rail into the void below. At the same instant the girl fired, and my sword arm made 2 moves. One man dropped with a bullet in his brain. A sword flew clattering across the deck and dropped over the edge beyond, as I disarmed one of my opponents, and the third went down with my blade buried to the hilt in his breast, and 3 feet of it protruding from his back, and falling wrenched the sword from my grasp. Disarmed myself, I now faced my remaining foeman, whose own sword lay somewhere thousands of feet below us, lost in the lost sea. The new condition seemed to please my adversary, for a smile of satisfaction bared his gleaming teeth as he rushed at me bare-handed. The great muscles which rolled beneath his glossy black hide evidently assured him that here was easy prey, not worth the trouble of drawing the dagger from his harness. I let him come almost upon me. Then I ducked beneath his outstretched arms, at the same time sidestepping to the right. Pivoting on my left toe, I swung a terrific right to his jaw, and like a felled ox, he dropped in his tracks. A low, silvery laugh rang out behind me. "You are Northern," said the sweet voice of my companion, "for all your golden locks are the harness of Satyr Throg. Never lived there upon all Barsoom before one who could fight as you have fought this night. Who are you?" I am John Carter, Prince of the House of Tardos Mors, Jeddak of Helium, I replied. And whom, I added, has the honor of serving been accorded me? She hesitated a moment before speaking. Then she asked, You are no Thurn. Are you an enemy of the Thurns? I have been in the territory of the Thurns for a day and a half. During that entire time, my life has been in constant danger. I have been harassed and persecuted. Armed men and fierce beasts have been set upon me. I had no quarrel with the Thurns before, but can you wonder that I feel no great love for them now? I have spoken. She looked at me intently for several minutes before she replied. It was as though she were attempting to read my inmost soul, to judge my character and my standards of chivalry in that long-drawn, searching gaze. Apparently the inventory satisfied her. I am Peter, daughter of Mate Shang, holy Hecador of the holy Therns, father of Therns, master of life and death upon Barsoom, brother of Isis, prince of life eternal. At that moment I noticed that the black I had dropped with my fist was commencing to show signs of returning consciousness. I sprang to his side. Stripping his harness from him, I securely bound his hands behind his back, and after similarly fastening his feet, tied him to a heavy gun carriage. Why not the simpler way? Asked Peter. I do not understand. What simpler way? I replied. With a slight shrug of her lovely shoulders, she made a gesture with her hands personating the casting of something over the craft's side. I am no murderer, I said. I kill in self-defense only. She looked at me narrowly. Then she puckered those divine brows of hers and shook her head. She could not comprehend. Well, neither had my own Dija Thores been able to understand what to her had seemed a foolish and dangerous policy toward enemies. Upon Barsoom, quarter is neither asked nor given, and each dead man means so much more of the waning resources of this dying planet to be divided amongst those who survive. But there seemed a subtle difference here between the manner in which this girl contemplated the dispatching of an enemy and the tender-hearted regret of my own princess for the stern necessity which demanded it. I think that Fader regretted the thrill that the spectacle would have afforded her rather than the fact that my decision left another enemy alive to threaten us. The man had now regained full possession of his faculties and was regarding us intently from where he lay bound upon the deck. He was a handsome fellow, clean-limbed and powerful, with an intelligent face and features of such exquisite chiseling that Adonis himself might have envied him. The vessel, unguided, had been moving slowly across the valley, but now I thought it time to take the helm and direct her course. Only in a very general way could I guess the location of the valley door. That it was far south of the equator was evident from the constellations, but I was not sufficiently a Martian astronomer to come much closer than a rough guess without the splendid charts and delicate instruments with which, as an officer in the Heliumite Navy, I had formerly reckoned the positions of the vessels on which I sailed. That a northerly course would quickest lead me toward the more settled portions of the planet immediately decided the direction that I should steer. Beneath my hand the cruiser swung gracefully about. Then the button which controlled the repulsive rays sent us soaring far out into space. With speed lever pulled to the last notch, we raced toward the north as we rose ever farther and farther above that terrible valley of death. As we passed at a dizzy height over the narrow domains of the Therns, the flash of powder far below bore mute witness to the ferocity of the battle that still raged along that cruel frontier. No sound of conflict reached our ears, for in the rarefied atmosphere of our great altitude no sound wave could penetrate. They were dissipated in thin air far below us. It became intensely cold. Breathing was difficult. The girl Fedor and the black pirate kept their eyes glued upon me. At length the girl spoke. Unconsciousness comes quickly at this altitude, she said quietly. Unless you are inviting death for us all, you had best drop, and that quickly. There was no fear in her voice. It was as one might say, you had better carry an umbrella. It is going to rain. I dropped the vessel quickly to a lower level. Nor was I a moment too soon. The girl had swooned. The black, too, was unconscious, while I myself retained my senses, I think only by sheer will. The one on whom all responsibility rests is apt to endure the most. We were swinging along low above the foothills of the Ots. It was comparatively warm and there was plenty of air for our starved lungs, so I was not surprised to see the black open his eyes, and a moment later the girl also. It was a close call, she said. It has taught me two things, though, I replied. What? What? That even Fader, daughter of the master of life and death, is mortal, I said, smiling. There is immortality only in Isis, she replied. And Isis is for the race of Thurs alone. Thus am I immortal. I caught a fleeting grin passing across the features of the black as he heard her words. I did not then understand why he smiled. Later I was to learn, and she, too, in a most horrible manner. If the other thing you have just learned, she continued, has led to as erroneous deductions as the first you are a little richer in knowledge than you were before. The other replied, is that our dusky friend here does not hail from the nearer moon. He was like to have died at a few thousand feet above Barsoom. Had we continued the 5,000 miles that lie between Thuria and the planet, he would have been but the frozen memory of a man. Pater looked at the black in evident astonishment. If you are not of Thuria, then where? She asked. He shrugged his shoulders and turned his eyes elsewhere, but did not reply. The girl stamped her little foot in a peremptory manner. The daughter of Matai Shang is not accustomed to having her queries remain unanswered, she said. One of the lesser breed should feel honored that a member of the holy race that was born to inherit life eternal should deign even to notice him. Again the black smiled that wicked, knowing smile. Shodar, dater of the firstborn of Barsoom, is accustomed to give commands, not to receive them, replied the black pirate. Then, turning to me, what are your intentions concerning me? I intend taking you both back to Helium, I said. No harm will come to you. You will find the red men of Helium a kindly and magnanimous race. But if they listen to me, there will be no more voluntary pilgrimages down the river Is, and the impossible belief that they have cherished for ages will be shattered into 1,000 pieces. Are you of Helium? He asked. I am a prince of the house of Tardos Mors, Jedak of Helium, I replied, but I am not of Barsoom. I am of another world. Shodar looked at me intently for a few moments. I can well believe that you are not of Barsoom, he said at length. None of this world could have bested 8 of the firstborn single-handed. But how is it that you wear the golden hair and the jeweled circlet of a holy thurn? He emphasized the word holy with a touch of irony. I had forgotten them, I said. They are the spoils of conquest, and with a sweep of my hand I removed the disguise from my head. When the black's eyes fell on my close-cropped black hair, they opened in astonishment. Evidently he had looked for the bald pate of a tern. You are indeed of another world, he said, a touch of awe in his voice. With the skin of a thurn, the black hair of a firstborn, and the muscles of a dozen daters, it was no disgrace even for Shodar to acknowledge your supremacy, a thing he could never do were you a Barsoomian, he added. You are traveling several laps ahead of me, my friend, I interrupted. I glean that your name is Zak Shodar, but whom, pray, are the firstborn, and what a dater, and why, if you were conquered by a Barsoomian, could you not acknowledge it? The firstborn of Barsoom, he explained, are the race of black men of which I am a dater, or, as the lesser Barsoomians would say, prince. My race is the oldest on the planet. We trace our lineage unbroken direct to the tree of life which flourished in the center of the valley door 23 million years ago. For countless ages the fruit of this tree underwent the gradual changes of evolution, passing by degrees from true plant life to a combination of plant and animal. In the first stages the fruit of the tree possessed only the power of independent muscular action, while the stem remained attached to the parent plant. Later a brain developed in the fruit, so that hanging there by their long stems they thought and moved as individuals. Then, with the development of perceptions came a comparison of them, judgments were reached and compared, and thus reason and the power to reason were born upon Barsoom. Ages passed. Many forms of life came and went upon the tree of life, but still all were attached to the parent plant by stems of varying lengths. At length the fruit tree consisted in tiny plant men, such as we now see reproduced in such huge dimensions in the valley door, but still hanging to the limbs and branches of the tree by the stems which grew from the tops of their heads. The buds from which the plant men blossomed resembled large nuts, about a foot in diameter, divided by double partition walls into 4 sections. In one section grew the plant man, in another a 16-legged worm, in the third the progenitor of the white ape, and in the fourth the primeval black man of Barsoom. When the bud burst, the plant man remained dangling at the end of his stem, but the 3 other sections fell to the ground, where the efforts of their imprisoned occupants to escape sent them hopping about in all directions. Thus as time went on, all Barsoom was covered with these imprisoned creatures. For countless ages they lived their long lives within their hard shells, hopping and skipping about the broad planet, falling into rivers, lakes, and seas to be still further spread about the surface of the new world. Countless billions died before the first black man broke through his prison walls into the light of day. Prompted by curiosity, he broke open other shells and the peopling of Barsoom commenced. The pure strain of the blood of this first black man has remained untainted by admixture with other creatures in the race of which I am a member, but from the 16-legged worm, the first ape and renegade black man has sprung every other form of animal life upon Barsoom. The Therns, and he smiled maliciously as he spoke, are but the result of ages of evolution from the pure white ape of antiquity. They are a lower order still. There is but one race of true and immortal humans on Barsoom. It is the race of black men. The tree of life is dead, but before it died the plant men learned to detach themselves from it and roam the face of Barsoom with the other children of the first parent. Now their bisexuality permits them to reproduce themselves after the manner of true plants, but otherwise they have progressed but little in all the ages of their existence. Their actions and movements are largely matters of instinct and not guided to any great extent by reason, since the brain of a plant man is but a trifle larger than the end of your smallest finger. They live upon vegetation and the blood of animals, and their brain is just large enough to direct their movements in the direction of food and to translate the food sensations which are carried to it from their eyes and ears. They have no sense of self-preservation and so are entirely without fear in the face of danger. That is why they are such terrible antagonists in combat. I wondered why the black man took such pains to discourse thus at length to enemies upon the genesis of life Barsoomian. It seemed a strangely inopportune moment for a proud member of a proud race to unbend in casual conversation with a captor, especially in view of the fact that the black still lay securely bound upon the deck. It was the faintest straying of his eye beyond me for the barest fraction of a second that explained his motive for thus dragging out my interest in his truly absorbing story. He lay a little forward of where I stood at the levers, and thus he faced the stern of the vessel as he addressed me. It was at the end of his description of the plant men that I caught his eye fixed momentarily upon something behind me. Nor could I be mistaken in the swift gleam of triumph that brightened those dark orbs for an instant. Some time before I had reduced our speed, for we had left the valley door many miles astern, and I felt comparatively safe. I turned an apprehensive glance behind me, and the sight that I saw froze the newborn hope of freedom that had been springing up within me. A great battleship, forging silent and unlighted through the dark night, loomed close astern. This concludes the third part of 8 total of The Gods of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.